Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Vectra AI podcast, where we in the Vectra product team talk about the stuff we hear, what we learn, what we are working on, and occasionally rant on topics we are passionate about. My name is Tiffany Nib. I'm a product marketer on the product team, and today I'm joined by John Mancini, our principal product manager. So today's topic is a threat briefing on ransomware, where John will walk us through the latest development trends of ransomware and how to stop such attack. With that, I'll hand over to John.
Awesome. Thanks, Tiff. So I'll jump right in. I think the goal of this briefing is to kind of catch everyone up on the current state of ransomware because it's an evolving landscape. Lots of things are constantly changing here. I think the level set that I want to take is the current state of research on the actual cost of ransomware damage. So what's been tracked is the cost in total for 2023 of attackers in terms of their financial gain is $1.1 billion attributable ransomware. Now, that is a significant increase from 2022, and it ultimately is because 2022 is an abnormality in terms of this kind of landscape. So 2022 was plagued with some geopolitical changes that actually directly relate to these ransomware actors, and so it resulted in less activity in that time frame. But 2023 follows the similar trajectory we saw of 2020 and 2021 in terms of increase in these activities of ransomware actors and their dollars that they're gaining from this environment. What it looks like, if you dig in a little bit more, it's not just that the total amount of dollars that are being pulled into ransomware has increased, but also there's been a shift in the overall nature of ransomware payments. So there's been this trend of basically an increase in ransomware payments that are greater than $1 million relative to those that are kind of on the smaller end. So that 1.1 billion is coming more and more from $1 million payouts than it is from a collection of a bunch of small ones. And this makes sense when you think about the economics of these attackers and how they're operating in terms of scalability and effort for their time ultimately. And so this also, though, it's interesting to see directly relates to kind of the assumed skill and kind of focus of anywhere in one of these ransomware groups. So what you're looking at here is a kind of graph of the most common strains or groups of ransomware actors that have been out there in the past year. And what they're looking for, what you can see here is that certain groups have a high propensity to larger payouts and others have a much more kind of small payout. So there's a game here of who's focusing on kind of lots and breadth of attacks versus who are the dedicated groups that are going for those big $1 million payouts. But ultimately, the $1 million payouts is the norm kind of in the state that we're currently in. This graph here is kind of an important one to kind of dig into in terms of the naming that are showing up here, because these names that show up in these different circles, they're not necessarily groups of actual attackers. They're providers in this effective ransomware as a business model. So ransomware as a service. So it's worth talking about that, what that looks like. So there's really a three-player game that's going on out there in the tech landscape. There's ransomware providers, there's ransomware affiliates, and there's initial access brokers. The relationship between these three is one that's purely business related. So the providers are actively recruiting affiliates. They're doing this on the dark web forum. They're saying, hey, come use my tool, my ransomware package, my ransomware service, and you'll be able to see the greatest gains in terms of your kind of dollar value from running these attacks. And the affiliates themselves, they're actually paying to get these tools, get this technology, get this service, and then they are the hands-on keys people that are running these attacks. What happens in any of these purchase events is if an affiliate purchases a provider's tool, they will basically be given access to kind of a ransomware package, command and control dashboard, the technology to run a lot of this attack. But there may be still more things that they need as an affiliate to run the attack. So this is where affiliates will buy kind of initial access from initial access brokers whose sole goal is to harvest identities. So they will look for identities to buy they will look for identities in the wild that have passwords. They will run phishing attacks to gain credentials. They will then use those as kind of their aspect of this model, this business model, and sell those into the affiliates so that the affiliates can run their attack. This then kind of moves into the actual execution of an attack where attacker lands, they get in, but they're continuing to use the ransomware providers' technology and tools all the way up until the part where they're demanding for a ransom, because it's actually the provider will assist with any of the negotiations. They will assist with kind of posting snippets of kind of proof of life of data that's been attacked during these incidents. They have a lot of leverage in terms of kind of the actual way these attacks play out. And there's a couple different ways this business relationship can go. You could have a provider that is given a flat fee per use, a flat fee basically for a month in terms of just like a normal SaaS subscription. They can be taking percentages of any of the affiliates' gains. Lots of different ways that these kind of relationships play out that kind of creates a unique dynamic in terms of the business that exists here. It's useful to kind of zoom into one big attack that happened in 2023 to get a sense of some of this relationship in depth. And so I'm going to give kind of the top level view of ransomware at MGM, which was, obviously a very large kind of in the news event in 2023. Ultimately, this was a scenario where a threat group known as Scattered Spider was active in MGM for a considerable length of time, to the point where it was an $8.4 million day impact to MGM, totaling around $100 million. This ultimately is a dollar impact that doesn't show up on my first slide. In my first slide, I said 1.1 billion. That was from payouts. This is actually just business operation damage that was done. Now, there's a lot of controversy into how this attack played out, but I kind of want to talk about it because it comes from this context of the other player here. So Scattered Spider was a affiliate of Alpha V Black Cat. So in this situation, Alpha V Black Cat, who are the ones that are actually kind of in front stage doing the negotiations and kind of the communication face of all these incidents, they actually put out a statement during the MGM kind of incident talking about what happened. And ultimately, the statement that they came in short was that the actual $8.4 million day impact started before even the ransomware was deployed, because ultimately MGM attempted, it sounds, based off of Alpha V's statements, to take down their infrastructure to avoid Alpha V from progressing. But ultimately, Alpha V had gained access to high-priv Okta and Azure AD credentials that ultimately let them have strong persistence in the environment, even when the other infrastructure had been turned down. Ultimately, once Alpha V and Scattered Spider presented their kind of demands and weren't heard, they went ahead and they moved to encrypt kind of 100 ESXi hypervisors in the environment, and that's when the actual environment was shut down from the ransomware attack itself, not just from the defender actions there. It's interesting, kind of, that is kind of a very high profile incident, but it's interesting to look at the arc of ransomware in general in 2023 as we look into 2024, and we're kind of currently there today, is that ultimately in all these ransomware incidents we saw, and we're continuing to see, the details are changing. So initial access vulnerabilities keep changing, MOVEit, Forta, Go Anywhere, any of these edge devices continue to be active targets. But as they patch, things change and attacker dynamics change there. Attackers continue to find ways to evade EDR. Payload obfuscation is in continued game of cat and mouse with those EDR vendors. Same thing on the network. Infrastructure keeps changing. The way encryption is done keeps changing. And then even the way that attackers are getting in through things like phishing, those all things change. And so ultimately the details of how these attacks run change. But the big thing is that the core behaviors remain the same. So this is particularly relevant from kind of our perspective at Vectra, where we're focused on attacker behaviors, because we've seen this actually be the case ever since kind of attackers went for these bigger payouts in ransomware cases in the past few years. So what's the same is the core behavior of command and control. So outbound contact is the continued way that attackers are running their attacks initially. Credential access from tools like AD-Find, Mimikatz, PowerView, PowerSploit, Bloodhound, all these tools essentially living off the land techniques to try to gain access to credentials to move through the environment. Payloads are not the modern method once an attacker gets in. And the reason for that is ultimately attackers always need to move laterally, and credential usage is significantly easier than finding payloads to replay throughout an environment. So this is why RDP credentials, AD credentials are still the most common behavior that relates to kind of how an attacker exists in these environments. We see at Vectra these types of attacks that track against ransomware group TTPs all the time. This is one example just to kind of give you kind of what we see that really speaks to the core behaviors not changing. In this scenario, the attacker immediately signed in through a zero trust network gateway. Essentially, they had gotten the credentials, through one of these initial access brokers. They signed in and then immediately moved to gain persistence in the environment. So they spun up a DNS tunnel. Could have been DNS cat or something similar to that reverses kind of that control on the endpoint. From there, they played out the standard role. They went to try to gain access to credentials, so port scan, RDP recon, and then ultimately Kerberos sting to try to target a high privileged service machine account. That service machine account, they were able to crack those credentials offline, move those then to move laterally, where again, Vectra was able to see basically that lateral movement. And through the sequence of events here, within kind of a very short period of time of the attacker's activity, Vectra is able to see the attacker based off of those core behaviors that don't change over time, and allowing this particular defender to stop the attack before any damage can be done. And this is kind of the baseline state that we see of different payloads coming in, different means of getting through, but ultimately the behaviors are the same. So Vectra, at a kind of AI behavioral detection platform, is able to see the attacker and stop them.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks. Thanks, John, for another great session walking us through the whole business model behind ransomware attacker groups. Very insightful again. And hey, since John mentioned Scatter Spider earlier in one of the example, just want to call out that if you haven't checked out our previous episode regarding Scatter Spider, feel free to go have a look at it to learn more about details of this attacker group and how your organization can defend against them. And we will include the link in the description box below. Once again, thanks everybody for joining us today. Hope to see you in the next episode. Thanks.